Hello guys, welcome back to this Python sessions. In the last lesson we discussed installing Python interpreter in the PyCharm IDE. In this lesson we're going to go over a few topics. We're going to discuss variables, variable naming rules, data types, and type conversion. So basically variables are just where you store the value. For instance, a equals 56. You've already defined a variable and you've set a value to it. At times you need to say a equals 56. Now that doesn't need to happen in Python. You don't need to define the type of the variable. Just set a value to the variable. So what happens here is that a is allocated in memory space in RAM, and then 56 is placed in that memory space. So later when you print out the value of a, if you remember, come here and run this, it prints out 56. Let's print that out because I've put that there. So if I press Ctrl slash, comment those out, so it won't print them out. So you could define all sorts of variables. You could close James, and when you print out name, it gives you the name James. Now you could also say here we could determine what type of variable this is. This is just a number, but when we get to data types, we'll discuss different data types of these variables. This is a string as well. You could also say temperature, and then I run this, gives me 4.6. So I could also say so this is how a boolean, it gets a particular value. We could also say is awake equals false. If you try to find out if something is awake or asleep, someone's awake, and if I tap that, it goes into print as well. So if I run all this, get the value is true, false. So those are variables. Now going to variable naming rule, you realize that I've used lowercase characters. A, name, temp, on the right path, on the right way, is awake. Now alternatively, you could say car engine equals 1. So you could use this method, but in Python what you usually do is car engine equals 1. This format is used in most object-oriented programming languages like Java, C#, .NET. Most times it's a bit easier in Python to sort of have underscores. You're going to have multiple. You could as well use this if that's your preference, but when I write Python I prefer to use underscores because it gets a bit easier to read when you have multiple variables in the code. So I'll suggest you stick with this approach. You see I've used that here, and you cannot use numbers. That's an error right there. You cannot use exclamation marks. You cannot use keywords, for instance for docstring here, double, triple quotes gives you some sort of collection of strings. If I paste all this here, these are the keywords in Python that you don't want to use in your programs. Anything that falls within this group should not be used as variables. So I've used the for, which is not acceptable. If I copy this and I put that there, you can see it's not accepting that as well. So in later classes we'll talk about what classes, which is what I prefer to use. It's mostly used in OOP languages as well. For data types you have int, string, bool, and float. Now I've used this in several of the codes I've written in earlier. So if I comment this out and we'll start with int, I can say age equals 25, and we'll see what that looks like when I print it out. So print age, and I'll simply remove the ones written up here. So I'll just leave this one there. So age is 25. It has no dots, no zeros, so it's important because the system differentiates between ints and other numbers that don't have a dot at the end. So print age, and then for string, we've seen the string before. I come down here and I say his name, called, so it's going to print that variable out, and then bool, say awake equals true, and then we can print awake as well, and then float temp, so that area equals 35 points. I can have all sorts of values there, and then print temp. So if I run all this, so there's a bug there, so that's why it's bringing that up, and that's because I haven't removed this ones I wrote here. So I'm going to delete that and then stop the program and run again. And you can see 25, his name, awake, and temperature, which is what we did at the end here. So the final thing we'll be discussing is the type conversion. So at times when you get a variable such as temp equals 35.5, and you like to have just the 35 there. So if you print temp, just go to the remaining, I'll just put a comment there, print, and you can put something there, so this so separate what we've done before. So we have 35.5. Now I want just the 35 there. What I'll do is I'll print int temp. So int temp there simply converts the temp to int, to an integer without the dot 5 there. At times this is what you want because of the way you're going to process the data. The algorithm you're going to use might not require you to put a dot 5, might work more effectively with an integer, so you won't remove the dot 5. Similarly, if the temperature was 35, I put a float here, it's going to convert it to a float. So that's basically what you do, the type conversion. It could be other means as well. It's so you could convert, for instance, if this were a string, and that would mean that it's enclosed in a quotes, and we run this again. So it's a string here, but it's a float here. So if you are going to write this, you could say temp plus C, and when you run this, see that here it's a string because it can convert, it can add in the C, it can append the C to the 35, but here it's a float. And if I do a duplicate and do int here, see that it's printing the temperature as 35, and then it's printing the temperature float as .0 there. So if this was 35.5, now you run this, so it gives a problem because now it's seeing this more as a string, not as a float, because it's finding it a bit difficult to convert from string to float to int, because what it's trying to do here is to convert straight from string to int, but that won't work because it's not in the format that it expects. If it was just the integer there, and then it can easily convert that, right? But if it's a .5, finds it difficult to do that. Now if we were to put a float in there, So what that means is that it converts it first to a float, then converts it to an integer. And then when we run this, it runs perfectly because it converts it first from the string into a float and then into an integer. So that works that way. So we've come to the end of discussion today. We've gone over variables, variable naming rules, data types, and type conversion. So in the next lesson we'll discuss basic operations and expressions in Python, and you get to understand how to sort of combine these variables to create expressions. And see you in the next video.